Welcome to the Shifting People podcast, where we go deep into the weeds with leaders on the front lines of people management in the service industry. We interview the best minds in HR and talent acquisition, along with owner-operators, franchisees, and general managers to bring you real insights that you can actually apply in your business today. I'm your co-host, Derek Williamson.
And I'm Kathleen McDonough, and it's time to get to work. Today, we have Anthony Rodriguez, Vice President of Operations at Gratitude Restaurant Group, a franchisee of Dunkin and Baskin Robbins. Thank you for being with us today, Anthony.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, us too. And you are a restaurant guy through and through. Your first job was in restaurants. Tell us about how you worked your way up to VP of Operations.
Absolutely. I love telling this story because I think it's really relatable for a lot of people. I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to work in restaurants, but first job, I was looking for a place to live or to work. And I'm from San Antonio. If you're from San Antonio, and anybody listening from San Antonio knows Bill Miller's. And Bill Miller's was known to pay a little bit more, so that definitely attracted me there. I applied, and it was my very first job, and it's Bill Miller's Barbecue. And I worked there, entry level chicken table, and working there, I discovered I'm naturally good at restaurants. I had like the knack for working in that kind of environment and really enjoyed working there. Started on chicken table, cross-trained in all positions except for slicer because I wasn't 18 at the time. But worked there and really enjoyed it. And then from Bill Miller's, I did a bunch of odd jobs, but was working as a contractor for Lowe's, hanging window coverings when a buddy of mine texted me and was like, hey, there's a TGI Fridays opening up. You should apply. And of course, all my friends are working there. So I was like, yeah, why not? Let me go apply. Applied, got the job as a server. And again, figured out I love working in restaurants. I love this environment. Really enjoyed my time there. Worked there for 5 years. Started as a server. And I'm telling you, I cross-trained in any position that you could work in. Host, bartend, grill cook, saute cook. I did it all at TGI Fridays and loved working there. At that time, TGI Fridays just had one of the best training programs. And to this day, I still call back on some of those things that I learned during that time. And like I said, I worked there for 5 years and I got married while I was working there. And my wife was getting ready to have our first son. And it was time. I was like, hey, I'm about to have a family. I can't just be a server or a bartender. I have to do more. And so I approached management and I said, hey, I would love to be an assistant manager. And they were like, oh, that's so awesome. We love that for you, Anthony, but we can't consider you because you don't have management experience. And Anthony today, thinking back on this, is what does that mean? I don't have I work there, you give me the experience. But back then I just thought, hey, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. I don't have management experience. I need to go and get management experience. So this is how long ago this was. I go on Craigslist, right? I start looking through jobs and I found entry-level management at Wingstop in San Antonio. And I applied, interviewed. I remember in my interview process, I was interviewing with the HR director at the time, and she asked me, she's like, hey, what's your favorite flavor at Wingstop? And I was like, I don't have one because I'm a Buffalo Wild Wings guy. That's where I go for my wings. And that, I guess I still got through to the next part of the interview process. So that was great. Honesty is the best policy. But today, though, I'm totally through and through a Wingstop guy. My final interview was actually with the owner, the franchisee, Charles Laughlin. And I remember leaving that interview mentally exhausted and in a good way, because there was just so much information, so much passion from him that I got to hear it from him, the source. And I was like, yeah, okay, this seems like a great place to work. So I accepted the job and started there and started again as an entry level. And then I'm going back to TGI Fridays. That was my plan. It was bulletproof. I had all the answers, but there were a few things that happened along this journey that kind of pivoted me away from my bulletproof plan. And the first thing was that interview with Charles. I was like, this guy is really passionate about his company. And it intrigued me a little bit. I'm like, what's going on at Wingstop? Why is it so special? So I start working there. And then my first week of training, I'll never forget it. Charles walked in. And not only did he walk in, but he was like working next to me, right? Shoulder to shoulder. I thought that was so different from what I experienced during my time at Fridays, which I love Fridays, but Leadership was a stamped signature on a check. It wasn't really that shoulder to shoulder in person pouring into you kind of experience. And so that was really refreshing. And then the third thing was we had an AGM company meeting at our office. And I remember walking into that meeting, and there was just a lot of information that we were receiving. And one of those things was that we were a company that was growing. When I joined, there was 24 restaurants. So that meant opportunity. And then I started just looking around my peers, just listening to the conversation and kind of understanding that, hey, I can do a lot here, because I still had this kind of natural ability to just do a restaurant job or just lead. Maybe that's a better word, right? And I really, after that meeting, committed myself to Wingstop. And I said, okay, I'm building my career here. So my bulletproof plan to go back to TGI Fridays, threw that out the door and really went all in with Wingstop. And one of the things that Charles had told me in my initial interview is, if you take care of our company, we will take care of you. And that was so true, because doors flew open, right? I poured into the company and they poured back into me. I went from a GM to a training manager to an operations specialist, which was a position that didn't even exist, but because we were growing, we needed it, to a district manager, market leader, assistant director of operations for Texas, a VP, and then a senior vice president at Wingstop. And really enjoyed my time, worked with phenomenal leaders. I already mentioned Charles, my boss through it all, David Garza, peer leadership, and Bell, so many people that I worked with that really poured into me, that made me the leader I am today. And which also brought me to where I am currently with Rashad and the Dunkin franchise that I work with. Rashad is our leader and came here because we built something special over at Wingstop, and I was ready to build again, maybe move more into the driver's seat in that growth. And yeah, that's where I'm at currently. And we're building something special right now at Gratitude.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah. Love the journey. Anthony, there's a couple things we should dive in just on the history before we get into even what you're working on now. I really want to go back to maybe a little bit of, you don't have anything bad to say about TGI Fridays, but it does seem like sort of maybe their rigid definition of what was required for management kind of resulted in them ultimately losing someone who could have been really great, and you clearly thrive somewhere else. I'm wondering, how has that affected your thinking when you think about potential leadership in the restaurants that you oversee? And any thoughts there? It sounds like they had a very kind of a catch-22 of, oh, you need management experience to become a manager, and how do you possibly get it? But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things about the restaurant industry, and I've really thought a lot about this because I can't think of other places where you can literally come as you are off the street and get a job as a dishwasher and grow a career into senior vice president or vice president of operations. And just thinking about that experience that I had with Fridays, what really guided me towards, man, we got to get homegrown folks, right? Because, and I say this to teams all the time, people listening might chuckle that have heard this from me, but people working in that line level position they're already drinking the Kool-Aid, right? They're bought in. They love the company. They love what they're doing. Usually they love the brand. And teaching those soft skills, it's such a small pivot towards growing a career. And so definite looking back on that experience, it has informed me on, how I approach talent and making sure. I think the most successful businesses grow their talent from within in our industry. And that is definitely something that we're majorly committed to at Gratitude, and definitely at Wingstop during my time there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's so interesting because so many organizations have that same mindset. But the interesting thing, especially you had mentioned with TGI Fridays, especially, was like you had literally worked almost every single job you could. So I really think that's the precursor to becoming a good manager, is if you know how to do everyone's job, you can support them correctly. But curious if you could, as we move forward a little too, you mentioned joining the Wingstop organization and then really feeling the power of some really good mentors and leadership. And I think this is something that the larger organizations and restaurants maybe have more resources and people who have time to think about these things. But for slightly smaller franchise groups or independent restaurants, etc., it's really hard to know what does mentorship look like in a restaurant? It just feels like everyone's busy all the time. Like, how do you make time? And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, both in how you've received it, but also how you give mentorship, what does that kind of look like? Like, how do you carve out time, or how do you really make others feel like, how do you empower others and share your knowledge and receive knowledge?
I think the first thing with that is, exactly what you said. You said carve out time. And I think you have to be intentional with mentorship and really just pouring into people. Restaurants today have become there's so many checklists and there's so many systems in place to prevent catastrophe. And so we try to like really just standardize across the board how a restaurant's going to be run, right? And there's good and bad in that, right? Because you create consistency. But when it comes to people, people are different and it's not cookie cutter, right? You can't approach every single person the same. And so I always fall back to that word intentional, right? You have to be intentional, and it has to, when you have your list of things that you're going to approach throughout the day, people must be the first thing on that list, right? And then knowing who your people are. I think one of the things that with the mentors that I've had, and I mentioned this at the beginning, my first week of training, Charles showing up, it's presence too. When you're in a restaurant and you're shoulder to shoulder and you're having conversations, maybe not about the business, just maybe about different things in life. And I had a great conversation today with one of our district managers, Sid, and he just went to Japan recently, and we talked about that for 20 minutes. And he actually taught me something. When you have those kinds of conversations, it really leads to those deeper conversations about leadership. It creates trust, right? And when you have trust and best in those people that you're leading, know that you have their best interest in mind, it becomes a lot easier. And then sometimes when you're pouring into somebody in those ways, you don't even realize that you're doing it. And then one day they come to you and be like, hey, Anthony, I've been spending so much time with you lately, and I'm ready for the next step. There was a young lady who's now a regional vice president for Wingstop. Her name's Leslie Hammock, and she's a great example where she came to me one day. I listened to this podcast, and I'm ready for the next thing. And I think a lot of that had to do with just that presence and working shoulder to shoulder, having those kinds of conversations and not even pressuring. I think sometimes we're like, hey, you're here. Here's a polo leader, but just letting its natural course happen. And when you're present and you're having those conversations, you're making those real connections, that mentorship becomes that much easier. And then again, just being very intentional and saying, hey, you know what? I'm here today with this individual and they have my undivided attention.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think you really hit on especially a gap where I think a lot of people struggle, franchisees especially, like they start with one location, right? And it's easy because the time is built in because you're probably living in your restaurant, right? And then as you get a little bigger and all of a sudden maybe you have one specific restaurant you work out of, or now we have a little office and we're not in the front line as much. We're not actually like bumping shoulder to shoulder. And then all of a sudden you have to switch and it has to become a more deliberate kind of action. And so that you really added some great depth to, I think, folks that are in that transition. And I always found that like the hardest path in growth is to go from once you're at like about 2 locations to about 10 gets really hard because you don't have a full support team under you, but you're still trying to stay in touch with all your team, stay really close. And so you hit a number of things really well there.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, I think one of the biggest things as a leader that as you are continuing to grow from one store to 5 to 10 to 15, there's a transition that happens, right? Where you go from being a doer to a delegator. And that transition, I don't think that we talk about it enough in the industry because it's tough. I can remember when I moved to Austin with my family and took over that market. One of the strange things about that experience, because up until that point, I could power anything across the finish line. And so when I looked at Austin, I was like, oh yeah, no problem. I'm there. Right. And went out there and won the team I was working with, they didn't know me. They didn't know what I had accomplished or where I've been. And then two, it's a different market. It's only an hour away from San Antonio, but I was saying tomato, they were saying tomato. So we weren't really connecting. And then the strange thing too that I discovered was like my words didn't have as much weight as they did when I was in San Antonio, or even maybe when I was actually doing the job as a general manager. And I can remember David Garza used to tell me all the time, and I still think about this to this day. He said, there's a solution to every problem. That is so true. And I remember being in Austin and thinking, I hit a brick wall, and I was like, I can't power through. Like I'm trying to power through, but I can't power through. And in knowing and trusting that there's a solution to every problem, I started to think, okay, if it's not me, then who, right? And then I thought of some of the leaders that I had, which I had some great leaders, Andrew, Rafa, and these were my restaurant managers, and I tapped on them. I was like, hey, look, here's the message. I need you guys to say this message. And when they started speaking that message and kind of being cheerleaders for me, all of a sudden that brick wall became paper thin and we slammed through it. And that was my development from being a doer to delegator, right? I knew what we needed to do, but I had to delegate that to some key members of our team that really helped me push that message. And then we were able to get further along. Definitely a learning curve for me, and a lesson that has stuck with me as I've continued to progress.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference in who a message comes from, right? There's always the example of if it comes from your parents, you're not going to clean your room. But if your best friend tells you to clean your room and says, hey, I'll help you, you're going to do it. So I think that's the importance of who that message comes from. If it comes from someone they trust, someone that's doing it themselves, or that they know, and it's going to come off better.
Yeah. That peer-to-peer accountability is a powerful tool. It is so powerful, and it's so important that leaders take advantage of that, because I love what you said. Mom and dad tell you like, okay, but as soon as a friend says it or your brother or sister, it's okay, I better get in line. So yeah, love that.
Yeah. And Anthony, you were telling us earlier as well, just to add on to that a little bit. You mentioned the Focus Fridays thing. Wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. There was a cool insight, not just in who was giving the message, but also how you were giving the message.
Oh man, I love talking about Focus Friday. Focus Friday was born from, I was in a restaurant and we were the kings and queens of memos. We can put together a memo and send that out and be like, job done, right? The message is out there. And I was in a restaurant, and the memo that I poured into, memo, was hanging on the back of a cooler in the restaurant. And I asked the team member about that message, and they had no idea about it. And I'm like, the memo's right here. And they told me like, yeah, but that's 2 pages at 12-point font. That's a lot to read. That's a novel. And I was so disappointed. I was like, man, I worked so hard at putting that memo together and for people not to read it. And so I started thinking back to the lesson I learned from David. There's a solution to every problem. How do we change our communication so it's relevant and easier to digest for our team? And in thinking about that, I'm looking around, and what are people doing? They're on their phones and they're scrolling TikTok, right? They're looking at these short, quick videos, and they're consuming their information that way. And so I thought, okay. And this is also when you're scaling, the other dilemma I had was, how do I put myself out there so everybody is seeing me, right? And that's where Focus Friday came from. And with the help of, we had a guy, Oscar, who did this guy can do videos and edits, like amazing videos. And we put together video memos, right? And it became Focus Friday. So every Friday we had some message that we were putting out to the team, and that really took off. And we were able to reach a lot more people. And then also we were able to accomplish goals. I love where it started. I remember my very first Focus Friday, I was in the San Antonio airport whispering with my phone. And then it evolved into, we had power rankings and on different metrics. And we had a Super Bowl hype video, and it became really fun. And then it also turned into, it was like, okay, people are seeing me, but I want to start showcasing some of our leaders in our company. And so we were able to really just showcase leaders that were hitting metrics, accomplishing great things. And I think that probably one of the best messages that we put together was at the height of, it was at 2020, when with the start of the pandemic, and in the news, you couldn't get away from it. The message was, nobody wants to work. There's a labor shortage. Nobody wants to work, and there's nothing you can do because this is just the environment we're in. And we had two restaurants 5 miles apart, and one restaurant was severely understaffed, right? Just so understaffed. And then the other, right down the road, had, I think, in excess of 10 to 15 employees. And so that really highlighted to me that there wasn't a labor shortage, there was a leadership shortage. Because the difference between those two restaurants was the leader, and the team members at the store that was overstaffed, they were all in for their leader because their leader was all in for them, and was, back to what I said earlier, very intentional about their development and how, and their success. And I was, one of our Focus Fridays really highlighted this individual, Sergio, on how he was able to accomplish that. And that message really resonated with a lot of our managers across our entire company. And the company was in 5 states. It really hit home in all of our markets. And I was so happy to get that message out there. And I don't know if we would have been able to get that message out on a paper memo. So being able to do that on a video platform that was digestible on Focus Friday was awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the idea of showcasing either stores or people, leaders, managers, or even just a regular team member that's doing a great job, to not only give an example, but also I'm sure they get really excited about it, right? I'm sure they're like, yeah, I love being in this video. They love it. What did you do with that other store that was understaffed and you realized, wow, this is maybe a leadership problem, not a talent shortage? How did you go about fixing that?
When you have problems, you're not going to solve it until you address it head on. And sometimes you have to have tough conversations. And that leader needed to hear, hey, there's some shortfalls here, and it's in these areas, right? And getting into the details of those areas, and then again being present, right? And look, here's the problem, but these are the things that we need to do to solve this problem. Let's do this together. And that improved, and that store improved, right? And I think a lot of times leaders can shy away from those tough conversations. I say this all the time to my team. As humans, we need security, right? That's like a base need that we need. And insecurity, security is structure. And when there's structure and there's checks and balances, people like to be, they may not say it, but people like to be in those environments, right? And when it's just loosey goosey and whatever happens and it's different from day to day, people will run from those environments. And that's when you have those staffing shortages, which it's not really a staffing shortage. It really is just a leadership shortage. And we're not providing that structure. Coming in and bringing those checks and balances and helping and empowering our leader to bring a level of accountability into the restaurant improves staffing tremendously.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that the first thing is the frame of thinking, right? Because you're exactly right. Kathleen and I heard that all over the country, right? People saying, oh, I can't get anyone to work. And then you're exactly right. There would be another brand or another restaurant down the street that always seem to have people. And, the folks that don't address that leadership problem are bound to continue to have staffing problems and talent shortages. So it's this really downward spiral. So it sounds like the first part is that identification. And then you tied it back. I actually wrote down it's Anthony's acronym here, right? Because I love it. Like presence, access, and trust, right? In terms of leadership. And so then you apply that to that specific manager and you make sure you're there, that they know that you're supporting them, and just having that face-to-face time, having those tough conversations still is a way to build trust. So kind of tied a bunch of things you said together. I wanted to ask maybe a random question, Anthony, but I have also noticed just throughout our conversation, you've really made a point to give a lot of credit to people. You've named some people like by name, and I'm curious how conscious of a decision that is, or how that plays into your leadership thinking, or what's behind that.
I think ultimately it's gratitude. I said it at the top of this. I was not someone I knew that I had a natural, I don't know. I just love the restaurant. I was naturally good at it, but I was a raw talent, and it took a lot of people to shape me into the leader I am today. And that decision, to be honest, is very intentional and very on purpose, because I think that especially in the situation I'm in today, where I'm with a young company and we're growing, I think it's important that you recognize the people that have led you to this place and really be grateful for that. And I think there's a little bit of maybe good karma and really just recognizing those people. One pair of individuals I haven't recognized yet is my parents. They raised me well, so I have to make sure I mention them as well. But I think that thinking about being intentional with development in people and pouring into those, being present, all of that is learned from the people that did that with me. And I think that when I recognize those individuals, it pushes our message that, hey, now it's our turn to step up to the plate and do that for the next generation of leaders. And so I think it's so important to really recognize those that have poured into you. And I think for me personally, it reinforces my responsibility to do that for others now.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And to that point, what advice would you give to someone starting their first restaurant job that maybe listens to this and says, "Oh, wow, could I go from being a dishwasher or being on the chicken line and to vice president of operations?"
The answer is absolutely yes. And I think that, again, with this industry, in the organizations I've been with, including in Gratitude right now, those opportunities are there. And what I love about restaurants is it's there for those that pour into the company that they're in. It's there for the achievers. It's there for the people that want to win. If you have those things and you're coachable, the sky's the limit, right? The sky's the limit, and you can achieve whatever you want to achieve, whether that be professionally or even personally. I can think of a ton of things that have happened for me personally, growing my career through the years. And yeah, I think that if you're getting your first time job, and I know there's a lot of people out there that maybe the prospect of college is, I don't know if I want to go to college and then have debt, or if I want to spend that time. Honestly, I wish that I would have just started doing this like when I graduated high school. Man, I wish I would have been doing this then. And so I think that we used to say this, or I say this all the time. Hey, come work with me and I'll teach you to run a multi-million dollar operation where you wear an HR hat, you wear an operations hat, you wear a financial hat. And Tina Bertagni, she was our director of training back at Wingstop. I did mention her, but I want to make sure I do. I remember her telling me, she put it in perspective for me when I was a manager, and I think I was like 23, and she's like, how many 23-year-olds do you know are running a multi-million dollar operation and having to manage everything that you manage? And I was like, whoa, that was like just a head explode kind of moment for me, where I was like, wow, I'm doing some big time business, and yeah, there isn't a lot of people doing this. And I think that's a message that we need to, and I say we, the restaurant industry, we really need to broadcast and do a better job of stating a case where, hey, come work at Dunkin and start as a drink initiator, and we'll grow your career to a restaurant manager, a training restaurant manager, a district manager, a director, a training coordinator, whatever. The sky's the limit. And my advice to them is commit and doors will open.
Yeah, incredible. It's interesting. Like, I had never thought of this, but the restaurant industry is one of the few remaining industries where you really can do that. And aside from maybe a more like rigid large corporation, like you're generally not going to hit these like artificial ceilings, right? You can learn everything about the business that you need to in order to get to the next step by working in the business, and you can skill up as you go. And that's really that's not really as much of a thing in a lot of industries anymore. So you're exactly right. And Anthony, are you hiring? It sounds like you'd be a great person to work for. Anyone who's listening and has some interest in management or already is in management somewhere else that maybe doesn't appreciate talent. Any openings?
Absolutely. We are always looking for top talent, and we're in Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Central Texas, San Antonio. where our company has some big goals. We want to grow by 10 restaurants per year for the next 10 years. So it's 100 stores, which that's 100 restaurant managers, that's several district managers, that's directors. We are absolutely looking for top talent. And if you're somebody that, is a go-getter, that loves to or wants to win and achieve, this is the place for you. We will pour that much, whatever you pour into the company, we will absolutely pour into you. One of the things I'm very proud of at Dunkin is we have built with gratitude, is we've built a phenomenal leadership team, starting with our owner, Rashad, who is, I think that's a whole nother podcast, maybe. He has such an interesting story, but starting with Rashad, who is such a servant leader. And we've built a director team with Lilia in Chicago, Patrick in San Antonio, Rodney and DFW. And between just those three, I think it's over 100 years of leadership experience. And then I cannot, our director of training, Carmelia Walker, who I actually worked with at Wingstop. I worked for a franchise, she worked for the brand, and I've always had a great working relationship with her. Now we work a lot closer, and she has done a phenomenal job of revamping our training program, which really puts people first in making sure they're equipped with the knowledge, resources, and skills to be successful. So we've built a phenomenal leadership team that's ready to just really grow the next 10 years.
Yeah, love that. And so it's Gratitude Restaurant Group, or what's the full name?
Yeah, Gratitude Restaurant Group. And our networks all have separate names, but we're working on unifying. But Gratitude's in Dallas, Fort Worth, and if you can't find Gratitude, look me up on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have conversations. I think anybody listening is probably picking up on that I like to talk. So if you connect with me, I'll talk for a long time.
And you're starting with access there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're ready to have those conversations. That goes a really long way. But I think it's really important to highlight, I think a lot of franchise groups struggle to distinguish themselves from the broader brand and whatever people associate with that. But the Gratitude organization sounds like there's a lot of really good leadership and training and programming and care built around it. And that's not to say other but every franchise group approaches this very differently. And so it's just really good to hear you speak about it firsthand. And so again, it's reach out to you or look up the group. I assume probably on Indeed or other job boards, if they searched Gratitude, Dunkin should hopefully find something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you don't, again, I'm here. So
love it. Perfect. Cool. Anthony, any last thing you'd like to say maybe about Gratitude Restaurant Group? Just anything else that's really unique about what you guys are doing? I know a lot of franchise groups do a lot of, whether it's a community work, charitable work, other things. If anyone is thinking about coming to work for your organization, anything else you want to plug or shout out?
Sure. I think you hit it just a moment ago, but one of the things about us is we know that 100% of our business is people, and we are so committed to that part of the business. There's hard skills and soft skills. The hard skills, I think a lot of companies, they have that down. There's SOPs, there's all kinds of stuff out there where that is pretty solid. But it's the soft skills where we have a lot of opportunity, and soft skills and leadership and how you approach different people. And that's what we are extremely intentional about. And I think that's a difference maker for us at Gratitude, that we are, again, invested in our people. I keep thinking about this conversation I had today with Sid. And, I'd seen him in a week, and we got together and we talked about business. Of course, that came up, but most of our conversation was just about each other and our experiences. And I know that's the same for our directors, our training manager, and then of course our fearless leader, Rashad, who has always kept us front of mind. And it's just like when I came from TGI Fridays to Wingstop, and TGI Fridays was great, but going from a corporate environment to a franchise, it's a lot more personal and there's a lot more care there. And again, as not a stamped signature, right? It's very hands-on, shoulder to shoulder. And that's what we're all about at Gratitude. So really excited for our prospects, really excited for just growing talent. I think that's my favorite thing about this job, is looking at those that maybe I had a small role in this person's success. And that's something that we're all in on.
Amazing, amazing. Refreshing to hear. There's a lot of our industry in general, the restaurant industry in general, a bit of a mixed bag, right? But the organizations that get it really get it and they really invest in their people. And that's where other organizations think they have a talent shortage differently. I think a good full circle to much of the conversation. Anthony, really lovely to have you. Loved the conversation. I wish we had more time. We will definitely do a part 2 at some point because there's a couple topics that we only scratched the surface on and didn't have a chance to even dig in more. But it's always interesting to hear someone who's really gone from the front line and truly worked their way up and had all of the lessons along the way. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me a platform to tell some stories. And yeah, I would love to tell more stories because I got a ton.
We'll have you back for sure. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Derek, how amazing was that?
Oh, so good. I love that. I wrote so many things down. Also, Anthony manages to say the points, but then he has like stories to back them. But then he's got like some of those recurring things that kept coming up that I just found like, I need to write this down because this is just so good. Talent shortage versus leadership shortage.
Yeah,
I'm going to quote that forever.
forever. One could say he's a wealth of knowledge.
One could say that. Yeah. What did you think?
I thought that was amazing. Yeah, I agree with you. The balance of stories to like applicable knowledge and then overarching, I guess we could call them like, I don't know, ideas or snippets. You said like the access,
Presence, access, and trust.
and trust, right?
Yeah.
Acronyms, you called it, which I don't know if that's an acronym unless you
Well,
said
PAT, PTA,
PAT.
TAP. I don't know. We'll have to figure out the order.
I love it. I like that. My shifting question, if you were curious, Derek. Were you curious?
I'm just
You're not
kidding. I am. And for those who are maybe listening the first time, we always have a shifting question, which is a sort of a takeaway, but also posed as a question for you to think about. But Kathleen, I am curious. What is your shifting question?
My shifting question. Wow. So Anthony talked about the importance of the message coming from the person doing it and also it being engaging, right? He took a 4 or 5 page document of memos and turned them into short little video clips that he filmed of his teammates and managers in the stores. And that got the information to people in a great way. My shifting question would then be to take a look at your organization. What pieces of information are you giving to people right now? In what way are you giving it to them? How could you improve that? And how could you improve who it's coming from to make it maybe be heard more by your employees?
Like it. I like it a lot.
What's
Yeah.
your shifting question, Derek?
First, I have to acknowledge, I think that's a really good question. Especially, it's so easy. Like I remember this, right? When I was in the industry and stuff, you put out memos and then the reaction is just you assume, oh, it's their fault that they're not reading it. So I'm going to try and force them to read it. I remember I used to send out my memos via email and then I would make them reply to say that they had seen it. And now in hindsight, I'm realizing like, it doesn't mean the message was heard anymore.
Heard or understood. I definitely wouldn't have read that if you sent it to me, Derek.
Yeah, you don't read much that I said. That's okay though. But my shifting question, yeah, I think Anthony, he talked about so many good things. The talent shortage, leadership, the shortage thing, I think I'm going to quote forever. But I really liked his personal story of being in an organization that had an artificial barrier to get into leadership. It was really interesting because they had really robust training programs, it sounded like, but then still didn't carve out paths for people to continue in the industry. And so my shifting question is, what barriers, if any, do you have currently for your employees at any level of your organization to be able to access the next step or rung on the ladder in terms of your organization? What barriers do you have right now that are making it harder for your employees to access promotions, et cetera? And if there are any, what can you do to showcase to your employees like exactly like career pathing, right? In a lot of white collar industries, this is very common stuff, right? Like HR will sit down with you and carve out all of these, draw the map for you, right? We don't do that as much in restaurant, retail, like these higher turnover industries. But, what can you be doing to help people see that there is a path? And like Anthony had touched on, highlight that this is one of the few industries left where you literally can start washing the dishes and scale all the way up into upper level management, into franchise ownership, into corporate roles without having to get some other external training necessarily. Obviously, that's always going to help. Anyway, my once again trademark long-winded question, but
No, it's such a great question. That was one of the most fascinating things that stuck out to me in Anthony's story, that someone said to him, "Oh, you're great, but we cannot promote you to manager because you need management experience. How do you expect me to get that?" And he also mentioned, I don't know if he mentioned it on the podcast in his story then, but he did mention to us at some point that a rogue like training manager within his career at some point said, "Oh, well, don't expect to be promoted within the next 5 years because that's just not how quickly we do it here." And I think you're so right to have that as a shifting question, to have people look at that and ask themselves. I'd also add, maybe look at your culture and the people in the restaurants or in stores or restaurants, sorry. How do they all think about career trajectory at your organization, and have them think about it positively and not give a negative message roguely to someone that's in a team member role, because then that can affect their whole trajectory. They might leave because they heard that person mention like, "Oh, promotions don't happen quickly around here," or, "Oh, you have to have experience," or if they talk negatively about any part of the process of their career movement, they might leave. So I think, one, knowing that path and having people know it, but also having everyone know it and be positive thinking and talking about it within your stores.
amen. It's not just putting it in one memo, it's repeating it, it's putting
Having
it
it be
out
part
and
of the
then
culture.
digesting.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
love it.
that. And then I think that also helps attract more great people too, right? If that's part of your culture, people are telling their friends about it. Like, they're gonna mention it offhand when they're walking down the halls in school or at study hall or in college, or with their circle of friends at the however they circle up and play hacky sack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you're right. Yeah. And whenever people see opportunities for growth, it's motivating, and the opposite is true, right? If people feel like they're in a dead end and they're just buying time until the next opportunity that is the stepping stone they need comes along, you're going to see pretty lackluster performance, and you're not going to see them referring a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. So these things all sort of, you're either in a build people up kind of cycle or a stalling cycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So love that. Cool. A lot of stuff we covered today. A lot of really good, I think, takeaways. Can't wait for more conversations with Anthony, and we got a lot of more really good conversations coming up as well.
Yeah, excited for the next one. It'll be all about how we help, resources we can give to our employees. Look out for that one.
Awesome. Bye for now.
For now.